Welcome to Phantom Fables, where darkness whispers and shadows dance. Tonight, we invite you to lose yourself in a tale so eerie, so spine-chilling, that you'll find it hard to distinguish between reality and the supernatural. Every evening, we have stories for you that haunt in the darkest corners of the human imagination. Tonight's promise keeps you sitting at the edge of your seat. Your heart thumps as you turn with each twist. Shut down all lights, sink into your chair, and wait to be scared. Dare to listen, dare to believe, and let horror take over. Stay tuned, and remember, the darkness is never far away. This is the story of the Bleeding Wall. It was 1647, a year when superstition and faith warred in the misty alleys of the English countryside. The story starts in the deserted village of Ravenhollow, where the remains of an old cathedral jutted out into the open, its once white walls shrouded by ivy and rot. The locals called it the Weeping Cathedral, named after the eerie red stains that seeped from its western wall, which seemed alive, bleeding, and whispering secrets that no one dared to uncover. Fast forward to the present, and there was Gabriel Dawson, a 34-year-old historian and archaeologist, drawn to Ravenhollow. Gabriel was no stranger to forgotten relics of the past, but something about the whispers surrounding this cursed cathedral would not leave him alone. Every story he heard, every dusty record he read, pulled him deeper into the mystery until he could no longer resist its call. Standing 6 feet tall with sharp features and an ever-present air of determination, Gabriel wasn't easily frightened. Yet, as he drove his old Jeep into the fog-drenched village, he couldn't ignore the strange chill running down his spine. The village was frozen in time. Cobbled streets stretched ahead, flanked by dilapidated houses that seemed to bow under the weight of forgotten years. As Gabriel parked his car outside the lone inn, the Hollow Haven, an elderly woman with a weathered face stepped out to greet him. "Are you lost, sir?" Her voice trembled slightly, her sharp gray eyes fixed on him. "No, I'm here to research the cathedral," Gabriel said, his voice calm but firm. The woman's face darkened. "The Weeping Cathedral. You'd best stay away from that cursed place. Nothing but sorrow and death await those who enter." Gabriel smiled politely, used to such warnings. "Thank you for the concern, ma'am. I'll be careful." Gabriel spent the evening poring over old maps and manuscripts in his room. The construction of the cathedral went back to 1472, commissioned by a pious nobleman named Edmund Blackthorne, who mysteriously disappeared weeks after its completion. Whispers of human sacrifices, unholy rituals, and tormented spirits filled the records. The next morning, Gabriel ventured into the cathedral. Approaching the ruins, the fog grew thick and unnatural, curling around him like spectral fingers. The structure loomed ahead, its once majestic spires jagged against the gray sky. The western wall, infamous for its bleeding, stood eerily intact amidst the ruin. As Gabriel reached the wall, he saw the red streaks freshly running down it, as if defying all logic. He felt his heart pounding and his fingers touched the cold, damp stone. For a second, he heard a faint whisper, a voice not of the living, but of something ancient and evil. That night, Gabriel dreamed of the cathedral. In his vision, he stood within its shattered nave, surrounded by shadowy figures cloaked in black. Their voices rose in a haunting chant, words foreign yet strangely familiar. One figure, taller than the rest, stepped forward, its face obscured. "Free us," it whispered, its voice like the rustling of dead leaves. Gabriel woke up soaking in sweat as the chant could still be ringing in his head. He somehow knew this wasn't just some ordinary dream. He was being summoned, pleaded, or even threatened. The next day, Gabriel came back to the cathedral with his tools and a lantern. As he began examining the wall, he noticed a faint engraving, a symbol of a serpent devouring its tail, an ancient sign of eternity. With precise chipping at the mortar, he uncovered a hidden passage that led into the depths of the cathedral. He took the stone staircase down. The walls had been drawn with some mysterious carvings, which had scenes of torments and sacrifice. When he reached the bottom of the staircase, he found a sealed door with this serpent symbol. Gabriel hesitated, feeling the burden of centuries of old history passing down on him, but curiosity was more than this fear. Tugging the door ajar, he stepped into an underground chamber the size of half the town. The room was dominated by a stone altar, dark stains etched upon its surface. Skeletal remains lay scattered around it, their twisted forms frozen in eternal agony. Gabriel's breath hitched as the full scale of the horror before him came into his view. He had noticed, across from him on the far wall, a mural depicting villagers being herded into the cathedral by armored knights. Under it, one line of Latin was etched into the stone. Sanguis innocentium, claudit hanc fidem. The blood of the innocent seals this faith. As Gabriel examined the mural, the temperature dropped further, his breath now visible in the dim light. A low, guttural growl echoed through the chamber. He spun around, his lantern's beam cutting through the darkness, but nothing was there. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw movement, a shadow shifting unnaturally along the wall. The whispering began again, louder this time, forming a cacophony of anguished voices. Leave or suffer. Gabriel stepped back, holding the pendant around his neck, a gift from his deceased mother. Summoning all his courage, he shouted into the void. "What do you want from me?" The voices stopped, and there was a deafening silence. Then, one word echoed through the chamber. Truth. Gabriel fled the crypt, his thoughts reeling, his heart heavy with fear. He knew he couldn't stop now, though. Whatever was hidden within the walls of that cathedral had to be uncovered, and Gabriel was determined to do it at whatever cost that may result in his sanity, a potential cost. The night after Gabriel fled the crypt was restless. He lay awake in his small room at the Hollow Haven, staring at the cracked ceiling as the whispers replayed in his mind. Truth, the voice had said, an ominous promise wrapped in fear. Gabriel knew that walking away now wasn't an option. Something ancient, something malevolent was buried in the cathedral's past, and it wouldn't let him leave until it revealed itself. It was the first light of dawn, creeping into the room. Gabriel sat up and picked up his journal. He drew the mural he had seen in the crypt, the words etched in Latin and the twisted skeletal remains surrounding the altar. A knock at the door startled him. "It's open," Gabriel called, his voice hoarse. The door groaned open, and Mrs. Hargrove slipped inside with a tray of tea and bread. Wary eyes, however, soon fell on the sketches spread over the table. "You went to the cathedral," she said in a soft voice but with a reprimanding inflection. Gabriel nodded. "There's something there, something the world needs to know. Do you know anything about the mural or the Latin phrase?" Mrs. Hargrove set the tray down on the table and paused before continuing. "Blood of the pure does seal the faith," she translated. "The stories told that at the time this cathedral was designed, by this nobleman named Edmund Blackthorne, he applied it to some sort of a massacre. A group of village people who'd opposed him somehow were invited to the church claiming sanctuary. Upon entering, though, the doors were shut in, and there they died, sealed in forever." Gabriel frowns. But why? What could drive him to such cruelty? "Nobody knows that," she says. "Some think it is greed, others he's seeking immortality. Whatever be the case, their spirit never left. That's why no one from the family goes near the place." Determined to dig deeper, Gabriel decided to visit the local library. The village's small but well-kept archive was housed in a stone building near the center of Ravenhollow. Inside, he was greeted by a young librarian named Eleanor Hart, her keen blue eyes narrowing at the mention of the cathedral. "You're not the first to come asking about that place," she said, her tone both curious and cautious. Most leave before they find what they're looking for. Some never leave at all. Gabriel raised an eyebrow. And yet, you don't seem afraid to talk about it. Eleanor smirked. Fear is useful, but it doesn't solve mysteries. What exactly are you looking for? Anything connected to Edmund Blackthorne and the cathedral's building, Gabriel said. Eleanor took him to a room full of ancient manuscripts and books, many of which seemed not to have been opened in decades. Together they dug up an old dusty ledger with Edmund Blackthorne's personal account. In some of the entries were vague mentions of a ritual marked with the same serpent symbol Gabriel had seen in the crypt. The Blood Pact, Eleanor read out loud. This referred to an agreement Blackthorne made with an unspecified entity. For the power and the money it promised to his descendants, his innocence was required as a sacrifice. Gabriel felt a chill run down his spine. How did it end for his family? Eleanor closed the book. His bloodline suddenly ended a few years after his disappearance. Some say the pact turned on him. That night, armed with newfound knowledge, Gabriel returned to the cathedral with Eleanor. She was carrying an old tome with protective prayers. She had become less skeptical, having developed a certain curiosity. The fog was denser than it had been, wrapping around them like a living thing. The temperature plunged when they went down into the crypt, and the oppressive silence seemed to press against their ears. Gabriel led the way, his lantern casting flickering shadows on the walls. When they reached the chamber, Eleanor gasped at the sight of the mural. "This is horrifying," she whispered. Gabriel approached the altar, his eyes scanning the symbols carved into its surface. "There's more to this place," he said. "The mural shows the villagers, but look closer. The serpent isn't just a symbol, it's part of the ritual." Eleanor traced the carving with her fingers. The serpent consumes the innocent to grant power to the wicked. But why does the wall bleed? Before Gabriel could answer, a low growl echoed through the chamber. The shadows seemed to shift, coalescing into a figure at the far end of the room. It was tall and shrouded in darkness, its eyes glowing with a malevolent red light. "You should not have come back," it hissed, its voice like grinding stones. Eleanor clutched the tome, her trembling hands flipping to a page of protective verses. "Gabriel, we need to go." "No," Gabriel said firmly. "Not until we know the truth." The figure took another step forward, and the air thickened with the stench of decay. "You seek truth? Then bear witness." The chamber dissolved into darkness, and Gabriel found himself transported to another time. He stood in the cathedral, whose walls were pristine and whose pews were filled with terrified villagers. At the altar, Edmund Blackthorne loomed, his hands raised in supplication. "By this blood, I seal my power," he declared, as armored knights forced the villagers forward. Gabriel watched in horror as the ritual unfolded. The serpent symbol glowed on the altar, and the screams of the villagers filled the air as their blood soaked the stone. When finally a blinding light erupted and it faded, Blackthorne was gone, leaving only the cursed wall. As the vision faded, Gabriel fell to his knees, gasping for air. The figure in the room towered over him, its voice an eerie whisper. "Now you know. Leave or share their fate." Gabriel and Eleanor stumbled out of the crypt, their hearts pounding. Back at the inn, Mrs. Hargrove waited for them, her expression grim. "You saw it, didn't you?" she asked. Gabriel nodded. Blackthorne's ritual. The blood was not only an offering, it tied the people's souls to the cathedral. The wall bled because they never got reprieve from torment. Mrs. Hargrove groaned. "You go any further and provoke the spirits worse. Some things are better left in the earth." But Gabriel could not take that step. The whispers, blood, and tortured souls clamored for justice, and he had a sense of where answers lay, deeper within the cathedral. He was willing to take any risk to find them. The chill in the air was palpable, as Gabriel sat at the table in the dimly lit common room of the Hollow Haven. Eleanor was across from him, her trembling hands cradling a cup of tea. The crypt's revelations had left them both shaken, but Gabriel's resolve had only strengthened. "They won't let us leave now," Eleanor murmured, breaking the silence. "We've disturbed something ancient, something furious." Gabriel nodded, his eyes staring at the sketches he had drawn from memory. The serpent symbol, the bleeding wall, and Blackthorn's distorted grin from the vision. "We need to stop this," he declared, voice firm over the raking fear that clawed at his chest. "Those souls locked in that cathedral deserve peace." "Do you have any clue where we can even start?" Eleanor whispered, barely audible. Gabriel tapped the edge of his journal. "There's a pattern to this. The mural, the ritual, the blood, they're all connected. Blackthorn wasn't just sealing a pact, he was creating a prison. We need to find the key." The next morning, Gabriel and Eleanor ventured into the village to gather more information. The locals avoided them, their expressions a mixture of fear and disdain. Only Father Gregory, the elderly priest who presided over the village's small chapel, agreed to speak with them. "The cathedral's shadow has loomed over Ravenhollow for centuries," he said, his voice weary. "It's a place of sin and sorrow, built on lies and blood. I've spent my life trying to shield this village from its curse." Gabriel leaned forward. "What do you know about Blackthorn's ritual?" Father Gregory hesitated, his eyes darting to the stained glass window in the chapel. "There's an artifact," he said finally. "A relic Blackthorn used to seal the pact. It's said to be hidden within the cathedral, protected by the spirits of the damned. If you find it, you might be able to break the curse." "Do you know where it is?" Eleanor asked. The priest shook his head. "No one who has gone looking for it has ever returned. But there's a legend. Blackthorn's journal holds the key." That evening, Gabriel and Eleanor returned to the cathedral, their footsteps echoing in the vast, empty nave. Armed with lanterns and Father Gregory's cryptic guidance, they descended once more into the crypt. The air grew heavy with each step, the oppressive silence broken only by the faint sound of dripping water. They finally reached the chamber, where Gabriel approached the altar, running his eyes over the carvings for something they might have missed. Eleanor knelt beside him, running her fingers over the ancient symbols. "These markings, they're coordinates," she realized. "Coordinates?" Gabriel repeated, furrowing his brow. Eleanor nodded. "They point to a location deeper in the crypt. It's a passage Blackthorn must have used to hide the artifact." Following the symbols as a guide, they uncovered a hidden doorway behind the altar. The air that rushed out was colder than ice, carrying with it the faint stench of decay. "This is it," Gabriel said, gripping the lantern tightly. Eleanor hesitated. "Once we go in, there's no turning back." Gabriel looked at her, his jaw setting in a determined line. "I know." The corridor opened into a huge underground chamber, its walls covered in skeletal remains. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on top of it rested a blackened, ornate relic, a dagger encrusted with rubies that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. As they neared, the room seemed to awaken. Shadows shifted, and ghostly figures emerged, their faces contorted in anguish. "Turn back," one of them moaned, its voice echoing with despair. "We are here to free you," Gabriel said firmly, stepping closer to the pedestal. The dagger seemed to be calling him, its presence overwhelming. But as he reached for it, a deafening roar shook the chamber. From the shadows, a massive, serpentine figure emerged, its glowing red eyes fixating on them. "You dare to defy the pact?" it hissed, its voice reverberating through the chamber. Eleanor opened the book, hands shaking as she started to read protective verses. The serpent dived, great coils crashing into the walls. Gabriel took hold of the dagger, the weight of it jerking through his arm. Chaos erupted within the chamber. The spirits were wailing. The wrath of the serpent was filling the air. Gabriel raised the dagger, and rubies glowed with every passing second. "What do we do?" Eleanor screamed, dodging the serpent's tail. Gabriel's mind was racing. The mural, the ritual, the blood. The only way to break the curse was to undo the pact. "The blood of the innocent seals this faith," Gabriel muttered, the phrase suddenly taking on a horrifying clarity. "It needs blood to destroy the pact." Eleanor froze. "You can't mean—" "There's no other way!" Gabriel screamed. "Blackthorn bound the curse with sacrifice. We have to give it what it wants." The serpent lunged again, jaws snapping inches from Gabriel's head. In a desperate act, he sliced his palm with the dagger, letting his blood drip onto the pedestal. The reaction was immediate. The chamber shook at the shriek of the serpent. Spirits' anguished cries sounded like relieved whispers as their forms dissolved into light. But the serpent wasn't through. It wrapped its massive coils around Gabriel with a swipe of its body. "Run!" he shouted at Eleanor, straining his voice. "No!" Eleanor screamed, her face wet from tears. She grabbed the dagger from the pedestal and thrust it into the body of the serpent. The creature let out one final roar before disintegrating into ash, its hold on Gabriel loosening. He collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. When the dust settled, the chamber was eerily quiet. The dagger lay shattered on the ground, its rubies reduced to dull fragments. Eleanor helped Gabriel to his feet. "It's over," she said, though her voice was tinged with doubt. Gabriel shook his head. "Not yet. Blackthorn's journal is still out there. We need to find it and make sure this can never happen again." As they emerged from the cathedral, the first rays of dawn pierced through the fog. The oppressive weight that had hung over Ravenhollow seemed to lift, but Gabriel knew the battle was far from over. The dawn brought a faint sense of relief to Ravenhollow. The ever-present fog seemed thinner, and the oppressive chill that had haunted the village was lessened. Yet, for Gabriel and Eleanor, the quiet morning air felt deceptive, a calm before an inevitable storm. In the small inn where they had taken shelter, Gabriel very carefully reviewed the contents of his journal. The dagger had been splintered, and the serpent has been destroyed, but the spirits still locked in that crypt were unbound. Incompleteness was eating his heart. "What if it's not over?" asked Eleanor, as she spoke very nervously. Gabriel's eyes narrowed as he turned a page in his journal, revealing a rough sketch of Blackthorn's mural. "The curse wasn't just about the spirits or the serpent," he said. "The journal Father Gregory mentioned, it's the key to understanding what truly happened here." Eleanor glanced toward the window, where the spire of the cathedral loomed in the distance. "And where do we even begin to find it?" Gabriel snapped his journal shut, a resolute snap. If Blackthorn hid his secrets, he would have done so where no one dared look. The cathedral isn't just a place of worship, it's a vault, and I intend to open it. Returning to the cathedral felt like walking into the maw of a beast. The eerie silence that greeted them was unsettling, as though the building itself held its breath in anticipation. Gabriel and Eleanor climbed the winding staircase leading to the belfry, the creaking wood and rusted metal rails protesting their every step. The belfry was a desolate place, littered with cobwebs and rotting wood. High above, the massive bell hung motionless, its surface etched with arcane symbols Gabriel had seen before. "What is this?" Eleanor whispered, her eyes scanning the intricate carvings. Gabriel traced his fingers along the symbols. A warning, perhaps, or a map. As he examined the bell, something caught his eye. A faint shimmer beneath the grime. He pulled a cloth from his bag and wiped away the dirt, revealing a Latin inscription. "Ad tenebras, omnia redunt," Gabriel read aloud. "To the shadows, all things return." Eleanor frowned. "What does it mean?" Gabriel stepped back, studying the bell. "It's a riddle. Blackthorn's journal isn't here, but this inscription is meant to guide us to it." As they came down from the belfry, the atmosphere of the cathedral changed. The air grew heavier, the shadows darker. Gabriel stopped at the bottom of the stairs, his eyes drawn to a section of the wall that seemed out of place. "Eleanor," he said, gesturing toward the wall. "Look at this." Eleanor joined him, her eyes widening as she noticed the faint outline of a door. "A hidden passage?" Gabriel nodded. "It has been sealed for centuries." Unslinging a crowbar from his satchel, Gabriel used the tool to pry at the door's edges. The stone resisted with a moan, and then parted, showing the narrow spiraling staircase plunging down into the blackness. "This is it," said Gabriel firmly. Eleanor took a deep breath and hesitated. "Are we ready for this?" Gabriel met her look. "We don't have a choice." The stairs went down into a huge room that was unlike any they had ever seen. Tarnished mirrors lined the walls, each reflecting distorted, nightmarish images of the pair. Eleanor shuddered as her reflection morphed into a gaunt, hollow-eyed version of herself. "What is this place?" "A trap," Gabriel muttered. Blackthorn's final test. As they advanced deeper into the hallway, it started getting chilly. The whispers became all over the space. Though unclear, they sounded relentless, as if the mirrors were talking themselves. "Do you hear that?" Eleanor asked softly. Gabriel nodded with a tight jaw. "They're trying to get into our minds. Don't listen to them." Suddenly, one of the mirrors cracked, the sound echoing through the chamber. From the shards emerged a figure, a shadowy apparition of Blackthorn himself. "You seek my secrets," the figure hissed, "but you will find only despair." The apparition raised a hand, and the mirrors around them began to shimmer. From each surface emerged shadowy figures, spectral guardians bent on protecting Blackthorn's legacy. Gabriel gripped the broken dagger, its jagged edge glinting in the dim light. "You can't stop us," he said, his voice defiant. Blackthorn's shade chuckled. "You cannot destroy what you do not understand. This curse is eternal." Eleanor opened the tome, frantically searching for a counterspell. "There has to be a way to banish him." He dashed at one of the apparitions, the dagger going right through it. Then he had time to shout, "We can't fight them physically. We have to outwit them." Eleanor's eyes spread wide as she finally discovered a page in the book. "Gabriel, the mirrors, the key. We have to smash them." Gabriel didn't hesitate. He swung the dagger at the nearest mirror, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. The specter tied to it dissolved instantly, its anguished scream fading into silence. One by one, they destroyed the mirrors, each shatter weakening Blackthorn's presence. The final mirror crashed, and the room quaked. Blackthorn's shade let out a final roar, gargling with rage as it dissolved into nothingness. From the floor center, a pedestal emerged, atop which lay a leather-bound journal. Gabriel approached it cautiously, his hands shaking as he picked up the journal. Pages filled with cryptic notes, symbols, and the recorded ritual in great detail documented the ritual that damned the cathedral. "This is it," Gabriel whispered, his voice full of awe and fear. Eleanor touched his shoulder. "We came this far. Now we have to finish it." Gabriel nodded, his fingers closing tight around the journal. "The answers are here, but so are the dangers." The journal felt heavier in Gabriel's hands than its modest size suggested. Every page they turned was like a whisper from the abyss, revealing horrific details of Father Blackthorn's fall into madness. He had been desperate to protect Ravenhollow from plague, famine, and despair, but in doing so, he had sealed its fate with a curse of eternal suffering. The church bells chimed faintly, though no one had rung them. The sound sent a shiver through Eleanor, who sat across from Gabriel at the inn. They had barricaded themselves inside, using the few remaining hours of daylight to prepare for what lay ahead. "This isn't just about destroying the curse," Gabriel said, his voice hoarse. It's about undoing everything Blackthorn did, every ritual, every spell, every deal he made with the shadows. Eleanor nodded, her face pale but determined. And the journal tells us how to do that? Gabriel hesitated before answering. Yes, but it comes at a cost. The journal told of a ritual chamber below the cathedral where Blackthorn had performed his dark ceremonies. It was there that the curse could be broken when someone completed the rite, not to continue the curse, but to break it. It's known as the Mark of Sacrifice, Gabriel said, pointing to a drawing in the journal. There was a person standing before a bleeding wall, their hand pressing against the stone. Symbols surrounded the person, their meanings unclear but threatening. The person who performs the ritual must sacrifice something precious, Gabriel continued. Their blood, their memories, their soul itself, whatever the wall requires. Eleanor's eyes widened. And if they refuse? Darkened was Gabriel's stare. The curse shall not be eradicated, and more lives it will take. Under nightfall, they returned to the cathedral. It was the atmosphere that became worst of all, the thickening air cladded with impending doom. In hand, the journal was in Gabriel, but with a flickering lantern lit by an unnatural light, was in Eleanor's grasp. They again discovered the hidden staircase, going further underground. The air turned even colder and seemed to reverberate with a weak, chanted melody. "Do you hear that?" Eleanor breathed softly. Gabriel nodded. His hold on the journal became stronger. "We are not alone." The staircase led to a large door with a surface full of arcane symbols. Gabriel traced the marks with his fingers, mumbling words from the journal. The door groaned and slowly swung open, revealing a vast chamber. A tremendous stone wall dominated the chamber, the surface wet and glistening like it was a creature. Thick rivulets of dark crimson liquid seeped from the cracks in the stone, accumulating at its bottom. "This is it," Gabriel barely whispered. Eleanor took one step back as her instincts told her to get running. "Gabriel, this place, it is wrong. We shouldn't be here." He turned to her, his face stern. "If we don't stop this, no one will. The curse will consume Ravenhollow, and it won't stop there." Eleanor hesitated before nodding. "What do we need to do?" Gabriel opened the journal, his eyes scanning the ritual instructions. "I'll need to place my hand on the wall and recite the incantation. The wall will demand something in return, and I'll have to give it." Gabriel stepped forward, his hand trembling as he reached for the wall. The moment his fingers touched the bleeding stone, the chamber filled with a deafening roar. The liquid seemed to surge toward him, wrapping around his arm like living tendrils. A voice echoed in his mind, deep and otherworldly. "What will you offer?" A hazy vision formed before Gabriel's eyes as his memories flashed one after another. He saw himself as a child, his family, and each moment of his life filled with joy. The wall was ruffling through his life, hunting for the thing that he cherished the most. "I'll give you anything you want," said Gabriel, his voice trembling. "Just break this curse." The tendrils of the wall closed in on him, and the voice laughed, a cold, chilling sound. "Your soul will suffice." As Gabriel started to speak the incantation, the room shook violently. The bleeding wall seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, and shadowy figures began to emerge from the darkness. Eleanor screamed as the apparitions lunged towards them. "Gabriel, hurry!" Gabriel's voice rose, each word of the incantation ringing in the chamber. Shadows shrieked and twisted, their forms dissolving as the ritual advanced. But the wall fought back. The tendrils that stretched about Gabriel's arm crept up his chest, sapping his strength and pulling him closer. "Eleanor!" Gabriel shouted. "The lantern, use it!" Eleanor hesitated only for a moment, then she flung the lantern against the wall. The glass was broken and the oil flared to life, racing across the bleeding surface. The wall screamed as it wrapped itself in agony, releasing Gabriel. With the wall weakened, Gabriel completed the incantation. The chamber was filled with a blinding light, and the shadows were banished in an instant. The bleeding wall cracked and crumbled, its cursed energy dissipating into nothingness. Gabriel fell to the ground, his body shaking from the ordeal. Eleanor rushed to his side, tears streaming down her face. "Gabriel, are you okay?" He nodded weakly, a faint smile on his lips. "It's over. The curse is broken." As the chamber began to collapse, the two of them fled up the staircase, barely escaping before the cathedral's foundation gave way. The morning sun rose over Ravenhollow, its light breaking through the fog for the first time in centuries. The villagers emerged from their homes, their faces filled with hope and relief. Gabriel and Eleanor were standing at the edge of the village, watching how the cathedral would fall into ruins. "It's finally over," said Eleanor, a voice tinged both with sadness and relief. Gabriel nodded. Blackthorn's curse is gone, but his story will never be forgotten. As they turned to leave, Gabriel felt a strange warmth in his chest. The wall had taken something from him, but it had also given him something in return, a deep understanding of sacrifice and redemption.